Hello, thrill seekers. Welcome to Real Crime Stories, the channel that plunges you into the heart of spine-chilling mysteries, true crime cases, and unsolved enigmas that defy explanation. Today, we're unraveling a gripping collection of stories that will haunt your thoughts. If you're hooked on suspense and can't get enough of these eerie tales, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss a video. Now, brace yourself, let's dive into the first bone-chilling story. I'm a homicide detective. My newest case is unlike anything I've seen before. Just for a little background, I worked on the police force as a street officer for over 10 years before I got the chance to work in homicide. Believe it or not, homicide detective is generally one of the most coveted jobs in the policing. Once I finally got my opportunity, I seized it and never looked back. I don't mean to brag, but I'm very good at what I do. I reached a status in the field of homicide investigations that I often get called out to other departments to assist them. It's a mostly thankless job, as people only remember the name of the killer and not the person who put them behind bars. But I don't desire a spotlight anyway. A little extra pay wouldn't hurt though. To be fair, very few murders that are committed are ever done by a serial killer, and it is typically who you would think it is. A jealous ex, a cheating spouse, a drug deal gone wrong, gang fights, and while suicides are obviously not a case of murder, they are also left to the homicide department. This is what my job mostly consists of. However, on rare occasions, I do get assigned to a serial killer case. My most recent case is, how should I put this, unique. I mean, every case is unique, of course. No two serial killers are exactly the same, but they all typically follow a sort of pattern. This was something that I had never seen before. It started out like any normal investigation. An on-duty officer received a call about suspicious noises next door, and the officer found an unresponsive woman inside. He requested backup and made sure the scene was secure. Then my crew of investigators was called to the scene. The homicide department responds to any death, including murder, suicide, accidents, and even natural deaths. So, I wasn't too surprised when I first arrived at the scene. She was lying on the kitchen floor, but there were no wounds or even bruises to be found on her. At least on the outside, there could be some type of internal damage, but once again, the coroner would have to update me on that. There had been no signs of forced entry to the house, and there were no signs of any type of struggle. She was fully clothed, with no rips or tears anywhere in her clothing. By all accounts, it appeared like a natural death of some sorts, which is somewhat of a broad category, but most common is a heart attack. However, something just seemed off to me. I had seen plenty of heart attack victims, and this just didn't seem right. If she had suffered a heart attack, or some other sort of internal trauma, then why was she lying perfectly face up on the floor? With no fall wounds, and the kitchen was as tidy as could be, nothing out of place. Clearly the neighbors had heard something to make the call to the police. It just didn't all add up. That's when I noticed it in the corner of the room, a video camera. Grab that camera, find out if the victim had a security system. It should help us to see what happened here, I said to one of my underlings. I looked over the body one more time and looked around the house, but it all just seemed too normal to me. I would have to wait for the coroner's report and to see what was on that camera. Luckily, it didn't take too long to find the contents of the camera, but it only fueled my suspicion even more. It turns out the woman did have a security system. It made sense since she lived alone. However, it seemed quite convenient that the cameras shut off briefly before the victim's estimated time of death. From the last footage on the camera, as well as another camera in her living room, we can see the victim entering her home and going to the kitchen. It appeared as if she was going to open a cabinet when the footage stopped. No cabinets had been opened when we arrived at the scene, and her body was lying on the opposite side of the kitchen, nowhere near where the cameras had cut off. It still made zero sense to me. Then came the coroner's report. Heart attack? I asked mockingly. Heart attack, the coroner said in a somewhat dissatisfied tone. Was there any sort of trauma from a potential fall? Nope, I checked everything. She appeared in good shape. Was there no other abnormalities? These things happen sometimes, detective. You just have to accept it. I couldn't accept it though. It didn't feel right. I wouldn't be able to continue the investigation as things stood though. There was absolutely zero evidence of foul play, and I knew the department wouldn't allow me to continue an investigation as such. It would take at least one more, if not several more of these oddities to pop up for them to set me loose, but I just knew that this wasn't the end. However, for the time being, I did have to move on. Serial killers have a cooling off period, so I would have to wait for new evidence to appear or another death to occur. Until then, I would have other work to do and more crimes to solve. A few weeks went by, and while I hadn't forgotten about the odd case, it had been pushed to the back of my mind. I couldn't afford to have my mind clouded while I still had other deaths to figure out. Everything had gone back to as normal as it could get in my line of work when my deputy detective Alex plopped an envelope on my desk. "What's this?" I asked her. "I don't know. Someone from the tech crew gave it to me and told me it was evidence from one of your cases. They said they already made copies," she said, then shrugged. I opened the envelope to find a USB device inside. Even if it had been tested by our tech crew, I always err on the side of caution. We have a computer in our office specifically for viewing this type of evidence. That way, if there was some sort of deeply encrypted virus, we wouldn't risk infecting our computers filled with classified information. I wasn't sure what I was dealing with at the time. I tend to work multiple cases at once, so this could have been a variety of things. Alex had been vague, but she was one of the few people I could normally rely on, so I opened the file on the USB. It was a video file, and just from the preview I knew exactly what it was. It was the missing footage from the mysterious heart attack case. My attention became entirely focused on the video. It started where the last footage had left off. The victim opened up one of her cabinets and grabbed a cup. She opened her refrigerator and pulled out what seemed to be some sort of juice container. It was at this moment that from the second camera I could see someone entering her front door. The person was medium-sized with a male figure, and he was wearing a typical burglar-style mask. He had begun to slowly walk towards the kitchen, one sinister step at a time. Meanwhile, the victim had begun to drink her juice. As the intruder reached the doorway of the kitchen, the victim had begun to wobble on her feet. Something was wrong with her. Then it seemed as she passed out and began to fall to the floor. She didn't hit the floor though. The masked man caught her. He then laid her down gently in the exact spot that we found her. After lying her down, the man stood up and stared directly into the camera. Unfortunately, it was black and white footage, so I couldn't tell his eye color. I'm sure if I saw those cold eyes in person, I would recognize them though. I've looked into the eyes of serial killers before, and this was something more terrifying than I had ever seen. As the staring contest continued, I began to wonder if what I was looking at was even human. The footage was weeks old, but it seemed as if the man was looking directly at me, like one of those paintings where the eyes follow you, no matter how you move. That's when the footage ended, and not only did it end, it began to delete itself. I was still in somewhat a state of shock from what I had seen to really comprehend what was happening. Before I knew it, the footage was gone. The copies were of course a lie. What I had seen was the only footage of what had happened, and it was gone. No evidence remained. I must have grilled Alex for an hour on what she told me before I let up. She was usually dependable, but this sort of thing never happens, so perhaps she had become complacent when accepting the evidence. The person who had given her the envelope was someone we were familiar with, but the person who they obtained it from was not. We had to follow a long line of people to find out the we knew nothing about who had delivered the USB. It was frustrating to know we had lost valuable evidence, and I was the only person who had seen it. It was obviously planned out this way. The perpetrator clearly wanted me to see that footage, and only me. It is common for serial killers to toy with the police, and I knew now that I was about to enter a dangerous game. I knew I was clearly at a disadvantage because I had no clue what I was up against, but I'm sure he knew everything about me. On top of everything, I attempted to call the coroner who had told me there were no abnormalities in the victim. That had said the toxicology report was clean, but I knew there had to be something in what the victim had drank. Of course, the same coroner who had performed the autopsy hadn't shown up to work since that day he lied to me, which told me one of three things. 1. He was the killer. 2. He was a pawn of the killer and had run away. 3. The killer had used him and killed him. I found it unlikely that there were any other options. The first seemed the least likely, since I had confirmed the man had performed plenty of autopsies in the past and didn't fit the typical profile of a serial killer. Plus, I was certain his eyes were not the ones I had seen. I was leaning towards him being dead already. Despite everything, I still had nothing. Other than a brief stare down, there was no physical evidence. I returned home that night more frustrated than I had ever been. When I opened my door, I found something I hadn't been expecting. It was a letter. And yes, it was from my new suspect. Here is what it read. "Hello, detective. Having a good day? Mine has been wonderful. I hope you enjoyed my gift. I've had my eye on you for quite some time. You always find your man, but can you find me? I doubt it, but I do hope you give it your best shot. You will have to make a very important choice soon, one that has no true right or wrong answer, but I won't spoil the surprise. The fun has just begun." I hate to admit it, but reading the letter gave me a small adrenaline rush. I had no clue what the future would hold, and I was at a complete and utter disadvantage. The killer knew who I was, where I lived, and who knows what else. I knew by his words he would kill again soon, and there was nothing I could do yet. The fun had truly just begun. Story. I've worked as a crime scene investigator for 25 years. This is my weirdest case. On the 25th of November, 2018, the victim pulled into a budget motel in the early hours of the morning. He booked room 12 for a 3-day stay, and on the 4th day the owner of the establishment sent his son to check on the victim. What he found was something that someone his age should never have witnessed. Or anyone for that matter. By the time I arrived at the scene, it had already been cordoned off. Members of the county police department had swarmed the area, and in the absence of the sun, it was the blue and red flashing lights that cast their glow over the building. I made my way past the tenants who were half asleep, doing their best at giving witness testimonial. I stepped by a particularly shaken forensic pathologist who was trying to call his mother and entered room 12. Now, I've been working as a crime scene investigator for more than 20 years. I have dealt with some truly confounding scenes before. In 2006, a body of a missing hiker was found in the woods just on the county line. It had been burnt to a crisp, but only the upper half. Below the waist was completely untouched, as was the surrounding area. More recently, a farmer reported a break-in just after New Year's Eve. Presumably, someone had broken into his warehouse, which housed an industrial animal carcass shredder. It had been used in the night, and a pile of jellied flesh was found clumped at its mouth. Horrifically, it was eventually proven to be human, although couldn't be identified beyond that. Only one other thing was found at the scene. Within the remains was a small steel plaque, about the size of a business card, with the number 0002916 engraved in it. I say all this for simple context. I am no stranger to the unexplainable, but what I saw in room 12, it still keeps me up at night. The following are excerpts from the crime scene report I filed that day. Incident number 24-0711, date of incident, the 29th of November, 2018, time of arrival, 11:54 p.m. location, room 12, Sir Sleep-A-Lot Motel, redacted county reporting officer, detective. Victim name, John Doe, name yet to be confirmed through fingerprint or DNA. Gender, male age, estimated to be mid-40s. Occupation, unknown. Suspects, none at present. The victim checked into the Sir Sleep-A-Lot Motel on the morning of the 25th of November, 2018. He informed the motel owner, Mr. John K., that he would be staying for 3 days. No known associates or visitors during the stay. Victim was found laying on bed in supine position. Victim had skin removed crudely. Patches of flesh hang loosely, revealing bone in some areas. Teeth indents on right part of pelvic bone will be examined. The victim's head is absent from the scene. Notably, the body had been dressed in what appeared to be women's undergarments, specifically a pair of lace stockings and a torn satin slip. Neither items of clothing belonged to the victim. The body was likely dressed post-mortem. Addendum. Marks on right part of pelvic bone were positively identified as being from a human juvenile, estimated as between the ages of 3 and 6. No dental record have been traced. Blood covers every inch of the room's 4 walls and carpet. The blood spray appears to be inconsistent with splatter from traumatic injury, possible use of pressurized device. The amount of blood was determined to be approximately 2 gallons, or 135% of the victim's total volume. Teeth were found on the room's desk, 33 in total, arranged into a circular pattern 10 inches in diameter. The careful arrangement appears to be ritualistic. The teeth are currently assumed to have been belonging to the victim. The location of the victim's head has not been identified. Addendum. The findings of the forensic odontologist have determined that 32 of the 33 teeth belong to a person matching the victim's description, a Caucasian male in his 40s. One of the teeth matches a younger Caucasian female. It was eventually connected through dental records to be from 24-year-old Hadland, reported missing in 1997. The Hadland case was archived in 1999 due to absence of evidence. The victim's tongue was discovered in the bathroom sink, exhibiting a complete severance at the base. The incision appeared clean and precise, suggesting the use of a surgical grade or extremely sharp cutting instrument. Notably, the tongue was found in isolation within the sink, devoid of any other biological material, indicating that it may have been intentionally relocated post-excision. First responders noted signs of tampering on the coin-operated television in the room, which intermittently activated to static approximately once an hour. The television will be deconstructed for forensic examination to recover latent fingerprints and other trace evidence related to its manipulation. Addendum. Both of the victim's eyes were recovered from the interior of the room's coin-operated television. The television screen had been removed, and the eyes were placed within the cavity where the cathode ray tube was situated. This positioning suggests deliberate placement, indicating a possible symbolic motive. The only item of clothing found at the scene belonging to the victim was one pair of denim jeans, which witness John K. recalls being worn by the victim the morning he checked in. The jeans were contaminated with the victim's blood. In the pockets were found a one-way bus ticket, 1 packet of apple-flavored gum, and a button. No other possessions of the victim were found. A pair of small leather lace-up shoes were found at the foot of the bed. From the lack of blood stains, we can assume the shoes were placed there after the homicide. Addendum A. A shirt likely belonging to the victim was found 3 weeks later, partially buried in a field and redacted. A small town 240 miles south of the crime scene. The shirt matched the description given by John K. of the victim. Blood samples taken from the shirt were a strong match to those taken from the crime scene, although without the identity of the victim, a definitive link is challenging to corroborate. Addendum B. The small shoes found at the crime scene were dated to 1909 and determined to have some value among antique dealers. Due to their small size, they can be assumed to be children's shoes. The room showed no obvious signs of damage. The furniture appeared to have been undisturbed, although a Bible was missing from the bedside cabinet. Neither John K. nor his son David, lead witnesses of the case, recall seeing the victim with any luggage. For this reason, it is unclear if his possessions were taken or if he simply had none to begin with. The motive of this homicide remains unclear. I'll save you the rest of the procedural formalities. I've lost track of how many nights I've spent awake, staring at my computer screen, reading and rereading this report. It's stayed with me for the past 6 years, constantly at the back of mind. At my personal behest, the case remained open despite insufficient evidence and a complete lack of any leads. When it was finally shelved at the beginning of this year, they were no closer to solving it than we were the day we found him. Earlier this week, I learned that it had been reopened by the FBI. I assumed that there must be someone else in this department who felt the same way about the case as I did, strong enough to reach out and request assistance from the feds. I was tasked with compiling any and all digital evidence we had on the case onto a USB flash. I felt weird combing through all the reports, files, and forensics. It felt like I was visiting an old friend. I added the documents I wrote up on the day, the dozens of crime scene photos and witness statements. I've studied them all meticulously myself. I doubted some Yale boy with a corner office could do any better. I kept trailing through the earmarked files, checking and double-checking if there was anything I'd missed. It was dark now. I spent the day working from home, hunched over my computer and my sorry excuse for a library. That's what my job mostly consists of now. I couldn't wait for retirement. Maybe then I would have the time to read some of these books I have lying around. I decided I was finished for the night. I'd squeezed every piece of relevant information I could find onto that hard drive. It was up to the FBI now. I only hoped that if our victim left any family behind, they could one day get some closure from this. I was about to shut my computer down when something caught my eye. Witness 1. MP3. It was an audio file. Somehow I hadn't noticed it before. Hell, I don't think I had even listened to it before. To my knowledge, all the witness statements taken that night were written. I clicked on it, figuring it must have been taken from David K., the kid who'd found the body. I took a sip of my last dregs of coffee and sat back in my chair, jacking up the volume. The audio wasn't the best quality. It was shrouded in the static of an analog recording, and to my shock, the supposed first witness had a woman's voice. The following is a transcript of what was on that file. First responder. What were you doing in the area before you discovered the body? Witness 1. I'm staying in room 14, the room next door to where it happened. Been there for the past 2 weeks, thereabouts. I've come on hard times recently, you know how it is. I was living out of a van until this, but it wasn't exactly reliable. First responder. Apologies, ma'am. I meant what were you doing immediately before discovering the body? Witness 1. Right. Well, I came back from work around 9. I clean at the elementary school in town. I came back and spent the rest of the day in my room. I had dinner and I was just catching up with the news before I went to sleep. First responder. Can you describe how and when you found the body? Witness 1. Gee, it must have been around 10. I was turning in for the night when I heard a banging noise from next door. I guessed he must have brought a lady friend over, so I tried my best to ignore it, but it kept getting louder. It didn't sound like a headboard neither, more like someone chopping wood. It was too much for me to ignore, so I got up to go complain. I found the door unlocked and it opened wide up when I knocked. That's when I saw him, that poor man. First responder. Could you please describe the scene you came across as detailed as you can? Witness 1. It was terrible. Just terrible. I saw my neighbor kneeling in the corner of his room. His head had been cut off. Can you imagine that? There was blood covering everything around him. I almost vomited there and then. Then I saw the man in the bathroom. There's a pause. First responder. Could you please go on? You said there was someone else at the scene? Witness 1. Yeah, a real weirdo. I didn't notice him at first. He was just peeking out from behind the bathroom door, watching me. When I did finally notice him, we just stared at each other for a moment or two. Then he just strolled out from his little hiding place. Another pause. First responder. Please continue. I assure you everything you have to say will be of some importance to our investigation. Start by describing this man you saw. Witness 1. Okay then. He was a freak. I'll say it. When I got a good look at him, I saw that he had this great bulbous head. He was bald as a newborn, and the entire back part of his head was all deformed and sagging down. I think he had this disease. Oh, what's it called? A boy I went to school with had it. First responder. Are you thinking of hydrocephalus? Witness 1. Yes, yeah, that's it. Hydrocephalus. But it was much worse than that kid I knew. Sorry if I'm coming across as rude, but it looked like some horrible octopus. And the front part of his head was far too thin. He has this pointy chin and cheekbones. His eyes were as bulging as his skull, all yellow and white. I think he had cataracts. Oh, and he must have been around 7 feet tall at least. He was hunching over where he met the ceiling. First responder, can you describe what he was wearing? Witness 1. Sure. He had this battered old duster coat on. It was black, but he was covered in these stitched rags of red and green. The coat hung down to the floor, but I could make out the tips of brown leather boots poking out from the hem. First responder. Can you... Witness 1. Oh, pardon my interrupting, but the man, he was holding this. Well, I don't know what it was. It looked like a lobster pot with a handle, and must be 24 blades sticking out of it. Knives mostly, and razor blades, axe heads, chains, that sort of stuff. Anyway, go on. First responder. Right. What did you do when he came closer to you? Witness 1. Well, I ran. I just ran. Out of the motel and down the road until I realized everything I owned was in my room. I didn't fancy having to start over from nothing for a third time, so I came back. And that's when you bumped into me. First responder. All right, and how long was it from discovering the body until you called 911? Witness 1. Oh, I didn't call 911, honey. First responder. You didn't? Witness 1. Oh no, by the time I came back from my little jog, the place was already crawling with police. I still haven't been allowed back in my room. First responder. Are you aware that... End. His speech became muffled after that until the recording was nothing but static hum that had been in the background since the beginning. After hearing this for the first time, I didn't know what to think. I just sat in my old oak chair until my wife came in to tell me that she was going to bed. I kissed her goodnight and went back to aimlessly staring at the computer screen. Eventually, I closed it and stood up. I took the USB stick and left it on my desk. I left the room and locked the door behind me. I changed, washed, and climbed into bed with my wife. I kissed her on the back of her neck and tried to fall asleep. That thing that did this was still out there, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Story. I'm a psychiatrist. I think one of my patients accidentally confessed to murder. As a psychiatrist of over 20 years, I've seen my patients come in many different types, all of them with their own personal flaws, some worse than others. There have been some instances in which I've met people with problems so bizarre that I've dwelled on them for days. These are the ones who'd come in, tell me their story, then right away I'd know they were screwed. Obviously, as a mental health professional, I'm not supposed to spill the beans on their situation so quickly. My job is to stretch out the treatments for as long as possible until the inevitable occurs. One patient in particular stood out. His name was Adam, and he was one of the unfortunate ones. It was hard for me to tell at first, as his life story wasn't exactly unusual or bizarre. However, he did have a condition that was rare, narcolepsy, a sleep disorder that would cause him to randomly fall asleep at inappropriate times throughout the day. This disorder tormented him his whole life. It caused problems throughout his childhood, and he had trouble holding down a job later on. Despite this, he managed to find a wife that would stick by his side and assist him. She had a well-paying job as a nurse, while he collected disability checks due to his ailment and inability to work. Other than being his lover, she was also a great caretaker. His wife was the best thing to happen to him. Before she came along, he had spent many years alone, confined to the dark and silent shadows of his home. Unfortunately, Adam had to return to the shadows, as his wife went missing 10 years ago. Apparently, it took a great toll on him. As if dealing with his narcolepsy wasn't bad enough, he soon fell into a deep depression and went days without eating. His sleep habits grew even worse, and he developed insomnia. Months after his wife went missing, Adam made his first appointment with me. When meeting him, I got a strong impression of a shy and timid middle-aged man. He failed to make eye contact with me. He wouldn't stop looking at the ground and staring off into the space beside him during every pause in our conversation. From then on, Adam has been seeing me on the regular, and over time we both kind of formed a bond. Compared to my other patients, I was invested in Adam's life and progressed the most, and really looked forward to seeing him every week. I'll admit, after a few years I started to consider Adam as a part of my life, an acquaintance. But we had to meet later in the day, sometimes at night. Technically, my office closed at 6, but I didn't mind making an exception for Adam and allowing him to come in an hour later past closing time. His narcolepsy wouldn't allow the appointments to be worth it if they started too early. So we used his insomnia as leverage for our sessions, although he'd still randomly fall out on me from time to time. But for the most part, it would work out. The first time the strangest thing happened was when Adam was in my office as usual during one of our sessions. "You've still been using your journal?" I asked him. Adam sat across from me on the other side of the coffee table that separated us. He slouched forward and rested his head on both his hands, staring at the carpet below him. He didn't seem to be all the way there at the moment. "Adam?" He snapped out of it, then looked me in the eye. "Yes, I actually have," he replied. About 2 years ago, I gave Adam the task of jotting down his thoughts and feelings in his own personal journal. He told me it was a great way of venting, expressions of himself that only he could see. Have you met any new friends or acquaintances to occupy your time? Adam shook his head. No surprise here. I would ask him this question every month or so. As expected, I'd always get the same answer. During the past 10 years, Adam hadn't put much effort into meeting new people, as he rarely left the house for social gatherings. Outside of other personal occasions, the only time he stepped foot out of his house was for our sessions. I've been going to some bars and late-night comedy shows, he said. I paused, then raised an eyebrow before grinning. That's great. You go by yourself? He nodded. But I don't meet anyone when I go. At the bar, I usually just sit and drink alone, just to get out. And I find the comedy shows to be so enjoyable I often forget that I'm alone, Adam explained. It's all good. You're finally starting to progress in this area. We're just taking one step at a time. I wrote down some things in my own journal and was about to ask him another question. But when I glanced up, I was met with Adam staring off into space. He was just staring at me, or so it appeared. I smiled, then leaned forward, waving my hands in front of his eyes. Adam? No response. I did that a few more times, but nothing changed, even after standing out of my chair and walking around him to get a reaction. Every now and then, Adam's narcoleptic behavior would surface, but he'd fall asleep for seconds, then be right back with me in no time. This is the first time he just zoned out like this. Hey Adam, what's going on? I said. His blank expression scrunched up into a face of sadness. Then, his eyes began to water. I'm sorry, Sasha, he cried, as tears streamed down his cheeks. His wife. I don't think I can do this with you gone, he continued, speaking to no one in particular. The tear streams on his face grew heavier. Now I just need you to do one thing. Forgive me, Adam sobbed. Adam, I exclaimed. Saying his name did no good. It was obvious he wasn't even present. Forgive me. Come on, Adam, get back with me now, I begged. Forgive me. Adam, forgive me. After repeatedly shouting those two words for the next 10 seconds or so, Adam abruptly stopped, then blinked 2 or 3 times before glancing around the room. He stiffened when our eyes met again. I was startled, and I figured he could tell by my heavy breaths. My heart was racing. What? He muttered. Did I fall out on you again? I nodded. Very, I replied. After that episode, I ended our session and sent Adam on his way, not bothering to tell him about the outburst. I wasn't sure if he was even aware himself. It was clear that he thought he'd just fallen asleep as usual. But that wasn't the case. I've never had a patient just start talking in a trance, mid-session. And what was he even talking about? Forgive him for what? At the time, my guess was that I wouldn't see an odd outburst like that from Adam again. Maybe he was just having a really rough night, and his issues just took a bizarre turn? I think you know where this is headed. 10 minutes before our next session the following week, I sat in my office filling out paperwork, waiting for Adam to walk in at any minute. As usual, it was about an hour past closing time. What had happened last session had me thinking. I couldn't wrap my head around what could have triggered Adam like that, or how something like that could even happen. I thought about it all day at home, to the point I even went to the internet looking for answers. I didn't find much on what I was looking for, mainly because I didn't know exactly what I was looking for myself. Trying to describe what I had witnessed was almost just as challenging as figuring out what was behind it. I visited many pages on the net about narcolepsy and other sleep disorders, but only came across generic and typical info. When Adam finally came trotting into my office, there was a slight jump in my chest upon laying eyes on him. He carried that typical blank and carefree expression I've looked at for the past decade now. That tense and anxious bodily posture as he came and took a seat in the leather chair across from me. I gave him a slight welcoming smile. Then I noticed he was carrying a small black booklet in one of his hands. There was a band of elastic wrapped around it. His journal. Our session began, and it was off to a pretty good start. He gave me some more good news. He went to another comedy show and gave the bar a few more visits throughout the week. But this time, he built up the courage to be more social and talkative. Apparently, Adam's been approaching and meeting people more often. During the past week at the bar, he hasn't been drinking alone. He enjoyed some meals and had drinks with a few guys there multiple times the previous week. Well, you made one hell of a leap, I said, growing excited for him. Adam smiled a little. It wasn't much, but it was still the happiest I've seen him since forever. I've tried asking a few of them to go to some of the comedy shows with me, but they all said they were unavailable, he explained. From there, I dug deeper and was informed of many more updates on Adam's life and mental health. Surprisingly, things only got better as minutes passed. Adam made eye contact with me more often and was more expressive when he spoke. It was the best session we had in a long time, but like all things good, it didn't last. So, how do you think Sasha would feel about you finally opening up to someone else? I asked. When I asked that question, Adam froze with a smug grin stuck on his face, and he was silent for seconds. Adam? I waved my hands in front of his face and got no physical reaction, staring into space. It was happening again. Sasha wouldn't feel anything. She'd run away at the sight of me. Adam blurted out coldly. He'd lost grip of his journal, and it toppled to the floor. I hate myself for this, I really do, he continued. I gulped, staring Adam right in his unaware eyes. What do you hate yourself for, Adam? I asked reluctantly. I wasn't very nice. Not as much as I should have, he replied. I let the wrong emotions consume me, and now I've turned into something that resembles another person I don't like very much. At that point, I was starting to worry again, but something made me want to ask more questions. My curiosity was sparked, and I wanted to hear what else was on Adam's mind. Before I could get another question in, Adam was present again. Like before, he blinked multiple times before glancing around him. Also like before, I didn't tell Adam about the outburst, and continued our session as usual. Over the next few weeks, the sessions with Adam remained similar to the ones as just mentioned before, except Adam seemed to grow happier after each week. As the weeks passed, he walked into my office with more confidence. The slight smile I saw before was growing wider. Our conversations were smoother, and it became more rare to lose eye contact with him. The good news he continued to present escalated. He was still meeting people at the bar, and increasingly grew comfortable communicating with them. They were starting to feel more like friends, something he hasn't really had since high school. He even started talking to a woman regularly, and eventually managed to get her number. But he still complained of not being able to contact her outside the bar, as any time he called or texted her, he wouldn't get a response. He also seemed to have trouble getting any of them to go to the comedy shows with him. Other than some small misfortunes, Adam claimed that his life was finally getting better, but his random outbursts said otherwise. Despite the fact that the sessions were overall drastically better after so many years, there were still moments when Adam would stop responding to my questions and give me that 100-yard stare. Every time this happened, I knew the comfort of the session was about to be sucked away. Surprisingly, it became easy to get comfortable with Adam's outbursts. He started out pretty subtle and innocent with the things he was saying. At first, he'd tell me about small random things from his childhood. He told me about his dog he was gifted at 6 years old and how he named him Toby. Toby was his first best friend and would be waiting for him in the driveway every day when he got off the bus. Toby had to be put down 2 years later. The only real friend I've ever had was taken away early, Adam sobbed. He was crying hard as he told me this. One week, Adam shared his experience as a member of his baseball team in middle school. Wasn't that great of a player, and was benched for the majority of games. But when I hit that home run for the first time and got the win for the team, man, everyone was proud of me. Adam boasted, laughing joyfully. I heard more random things about his childhood, even the small and insignificant moments. Like when he was caught staring out the window several times in the middle of class, and the other students laughed at him when the teacher called him out. At other times, he'd mention a name, someone by the name of Kettlecucker. I heard a joke from old Kettlecucker, and it was funny as hell, Adam would say. He'd suddenly just mention this person randomly, but never tell me exactly who it was. If I tried to ask about this person, he always changed the subject. I'd try to ask Adam questions while he was in his trance. Sometimes I'd get good responses, as if he was actually fully aware, but most of the time anything I said wouldn't reach him, and he'd continue rambling. As more weeks passed, I still hadn't told Adam about what he was doing. I wasn't sure if he'd still want to keep coming if he found out he was spewing out facts about his life on a subconscious level. The more curious part of me wanted to see how far things would go. If only I wasn't so nosy. Adam's subconscious path down memory lane took a dark turn. The decent memories of Adam's childhood, that was once a breeze to sit back and listen to, soon sent chills throughout me. Adam informed me that the first signs of his narcolepsy occurred in 6th grade, and he frequently fell asleep in class. His father was very impatient and aggressive, and having to deal with Adam's ailment made him no happier. His father would shout and yell at him in frustration anytime he randomly fell asleep at home, and beat him down if his teacher called and said he dozed off in class. The bastard knew I had a sleep disorder, but he'd still beat my ass anyway, Adam once shouted in a rage. Apparently, that's when he started to hate his dad, and he's felt that way about him all throughout childhood. This suppressed rage led him to getting into a couple fist fights with his father as a teenager. Adam told me he'd come home drunk when he was 15, and his father shoved him outside on the porch, where he later fell asleep. He woke up in the same spot the following morning. At 16, he often stole his father's booze and snuck out in the shed at night to drink. I needed some kind of escapism, since actually leaving was off the table. Adam slurred, still giving that long-distance stare. One night, while getting sloppy drunk out in the shed, he spotted a sledgehammer hanging on the wall. The thought of going into his father's bedroom with it crossed his mind. I was gonna bludgeon that fucker, but unfortunately I didn't have the guts to act on it, Adam blurted. I didn't shed a tear when the bitch drunk himself to death and destroyed his liver. That was the first time I've heard Adam use profanity. It caught me so off guard that my eyes widened. I bet if I had old Kettle Cucker around back then, he'd cheer me up in a heartbeat. Man, does he say some funny shit. He mentioned him again. Kettle Cucker. Who was it? His thoughts would get even worse whenever I mentioned his missing wife. Have you ever told Sasha about the relationship you had with your dad? I asked him one week. This was one week in particular, when I got lots of good responses from him in his trance. Adam took a deep breath, then to my surprise, he started crying. I've never mentioned a word to her about it, Adam sobbed. But it doesn't matter anyways. Sasha hated my guts. I stared back at his emotionless face in confusion. What? I said. I used to be a total brute towards her. I yelled and cursed at her a lot, and the slightest of mishaps would cause me to punch or slap her until she cried. He started bawling uncontrollably. But I took it too far one morning, he continued. Sasha fixed me a hot breakfast on a tray. When she brought it to the table, she dropped the entire thing, spilling everything on the tray in my lap, including some scalding hot coffee. In a rage, I repeatedly bashed her in the head with my fists and killed her. My eyes widened again. Then I swallowed in fear, still staring at him up and down. He was grasping his journal tightly by his side. I buried her in my backyard. Then after some time I called the police, pretending that I hadn't seen her in a few weeks. He whimpered. The only person that ever gave a shit about me is gone, and it's all my fault. Now all I have is Kettle Cucker to keep me company. He always makes me laugh, or at least puts a smile on my face to distract me from my piss-poor life. Kettle Cucker. Now scared shitless I ask, Adam, who is this Kettle Cucker guy? In the middle of tears, Adam grinned. Then he started laughing. He was genuinely creeping me out now. Kettle Cucker? Only the funniest old fart alive, Adam blurted. Obviously his answer brought me no closer to figuring out anything. So at the moment, I left the mystery alone. Days after that specific session, I sat at home ruminating once again. This is the most concerned Adam has made me in a while. Did he confess to murder? I mean, he's been saying some pretty wild stuff, but I wasn't even sure how much of it was true. If any of it was true, I didn't know what action to take next. Contacting the police would have been questionable, as Adam wasn't even in a fully aware state of mind when he made these confessions. The thought of seeing Adam again the next week now seemed more terrifying. What possibly true event would he reveal next? I wouldn't get the chance to find out. Adam didn't show up anymore after that. In the following week, it was a half hour past our starting time. I sat in the office waiting. but there was still no sign of Adam. This was odd because he's never skipped a session without calling me ahead of time. I called his phone a few times but couldn't get an answer. The same happened over the next few weeks. Now I was considering calling the police. Taking into account the fact that Adam has never ghosted me once, let alone 3 times without notice, combined with his confessions, made me decide to eventually pick up the phone. I turned the television on one day and found that the authorities had already beaten me to it. The 5 o'clock news was on. I was shivering from head to toe when I saw Adam's picture appear on the screen. In the background, there were many paramedics carrying zipped-up bodies on stretchers. After listening to the reporter go on in the background for a few seconds, my heart began racing again. Adam was being charged with multiple counts of murder. I could see other people standing out in front of his house, crying and staring at the scene in disbelief. A few officers stood by to make sure they didn't get too close. I felt sick when I saw Sasha's picture appear on screen shortly after. There was a caption, "Missing woman found," beneath in large red text. Unfortunately, that woman wasn't alive. Then another picture appeared on screen, of an older man with some gray hair. Strangely, this person was found alive, tied up and bound in Adam's basement. The name at the bottom of the picture caused my eyes to widen. John Kettlecucker. It was at that moment I realized Adam was spewing at least some truth in his trance-like states. I started looking back at the other confessions that he made, and the more I ruminated over our more recent sessions, the more I struck myself with abundant terror. The thought of Adam sitting in jail made me feel relatively depressed. During the first few weeks after I saw the horrid news, I could do nothing but think about the fact that my time with Adam was now history. The bond we formed. It had lasted so long that regularly seeing and communicating with Adam was something my brain craved and expected. I'll admit, I was starting to miss him, despite what he's done. It took a minute for me to face the fact that, yeah, he really did kill his wife, and committed deeds much worse. After seeing the news, I did more research on the incident. As more time passed, more details and info made its way out to the public. Turns out Adam's life wasn't improving like he tried to make it out to be. Adam actually was opening up and talking to people more, just as he claimed. However, his interactions were very awkward and reeked with timidness, according to the many interviews I saw with people who regularly visited the same bar Adam did. They had meals with Adam and often did hold conversations with him. But many of the interviewees admitted that it was all out of pity and sympathy, as Adam's lack of confidence was obvious. Adam's failure at creating a social life was internally making his feelings of loneliness worse, while also building up frustration and rage. Some recorded interviews with Adam himself revealed that his new way of dealing with this loneliness and frustration was to kidnap and hold some of the people he met at the bar captive. Adam made some real confessions during his interview, explaining how he lured his victims out to his car before using chloroform to knock them unconscious. Then he'd take them to his house and tie them up in his basement. Oddly enough, the reason he gave for doing this was to simply find someone to keep him company. He kept them in his basement and pretty much forced them to be his buddy. He'd hold conversations with them for hours, spending most of his days in the basement communicating with total strangers. His victims were forced to watch TV with him, and he even cooked meals and brought them food. If Adam found his victim to be boring, or in Adam's words, bad company, he got rid of them right away. This was done by bludgeoning them to death with a sledgehammer, before burying them right next to his dead wife in the backyard. "The same hammer I almost killed my father with," Adam said in an interview. Some of the bodies were discovered with terribly fractured skulls, or large pieces of their cranium totally missing. He kept each person for about a week before killing them off and moving on to the next one. Adam did this until he came across the older gentleman I saw on the television earlier, John Kettlecucker. He was the comedian that performed at the comedy shows Adam often attended. After one of the shows, Adam wanted to personally speak to John. Adam met with John out by his car. After some friendly verbal exchange, John was of course chloroformed. Unlike Adam's other victims, Kettlecucker was held captive for weeks. His talent at making people laugh is what ultimately saved his life. The only reason Adam found John to be good company was because he enjoyed hearing his jokes for hours on end. Other than his own life, he also saved countless others, as Adam would have alternatively picked off John and continued taking the lives of many more on his quest to capture the best one. For months going on, I got a taste of what Adam has felt his whole life. Soon I was depressed, and couldn't help but to constantly think about Adam, how he's doing in prison. Whether or not he feels remorse for his deeds. Has he thought of me? The idea of visiting Adam in prison even crossed my mind, but I knew that would be pushing it. I had to remind myself that he's my ex-patient, not family or a friend. I had to move on, and stop spending the end of every day in my office looking back at the version of Adam who was wearing a mask of someone he wasn't. While slouched up in the chair of my office one evening, I just so happened to see something stuck between the pillows of the sofa in front of me. Adam's journal. I realized that it's been there for some time now, ever since Adam last came in. I didn't plan on cracking it open and wandering into Adam's mind anytime soon. Not that I wasn't curious. It's just the fact that only God knows what madness lies inside. Story. I'm the chef that cooks death row inmates their last meal. My secret ingredient came back to bite me. The botched execution of Norton Carraway, the most prolific serial killer you've never heard of, should have made national headlines for weeks. But Carraway was so much more than your average garden variety killer, and the factors that made his case so special also made it embarrassing for powerful people with means to make unsightly stories go away. That meant in the hours that followed, I had very little information to go on, just the details I'd seen firsthand in the witness gallery, and the gnawing feeling it was all my fault. I paced until I thought I'd wear a hole in my apartment floor, replaying the events in the hopes that some logical explanation would let me off the hook. Guards led Carraway into the chamber, scalp shaved bald. They restrained him in the electric chair, the method he had fought in court to have over lethal injection. When the executioner threw the lever, Carraway convulsed. I kept waiting for the shaking to stop. Instead, it worsened. I don't think I'll ever forget the screaming and the smell of burning skin. Prison staff shut the curtains to the witness gallery and rushed us out. I left knowing he was still alive, and silently prayed with each passing moment that I would get the call confirming his death. When my cell phone finally did ring, it was Warden Paul Perkins, calling from his personal number. I answered. Hello? We need to talk about Carraway's last meal. My blood felt cold. What did he know? How could he know? I don't. In person. I've never driven so fast. It's a miracle I didn't get pulled over. I reached the penitentiary before dawn. Place looks like an old high school, wrapped up in barbed wire. An uneasy silence filled the long, sterile corridors. The guards I passed looked twitchy and unnerved. The whole prison seemed to be on its feet, waiting for something. The warden greeted me in his modest office, all bookshelves and filing cabinets, with a small window overlooking the plains. It's been a long night. He gestured toward 2 steaming mugs of coffee on his desk. Sit, drink. I obeyed. I didn't think you stayed for executions, Paul said. Usually don't. The warden lowered himself into his chair with a huff. Why was last night different? I studied his pudgy face, normally bright, kind, and clean-shaven. This morning, his eyes were bloodshot. A victim approached me, I said. Give him a grain of truth, something he may know anyway. It made this case feel more personal. Who? Rebecca, I said. She tracked me down and knocked on my door. The poor woman had looked so thin, like she'd forgotten to eat. Mismatched, wrinkled clothes. Paul just looked at me, expectant. I continued. I felt awful for her, so I invited her in, made her dinner, then let her talk about her daughter. Among other things. Oh, if only she had just gone home. I know you were doing a nice thing, but I'd be careful around her, Paul said. He took a sip of coffee and smacked his lips. When Rebecca's daughter went missing, did you know that she was the prime suspect? No, I didn't. A lot of people up in that tiny town still believe Rebecca is the strangler. Seems none of them are eager to open those old wounds. Paul set the coffee down. In the early days, back when it was only a disappearance, a canine officer paid her a visit. He wanted one of Daniela's favorite stuffed animals, something to let the dogs catch her scent. Know what they found? I shook my head. Weird stuff, Kathy. Runes, weird little dolls, and animal bones. She told the cops she'd been doing a ritual to bring her baby back, Paul said. She couldn't tell them where she was when Daniela went missing. So they booked her. Caraway was well-trained, disciplined, waited as long as he could, I expect. But that urge, he trailed off. He couldn't help himself, I expect. Had I given too much away in mentioning Rebecca? Point is, Rebecca might not have done anything to her daughter. But she's not safe or sane, Paul said. I'm getting sidetracked, though. The execution. You stayed out of sympathy then? Sure, you could call it that. Okay. Paul nodded. Well, things got a bit hectic after you left. Shall I fill you in? I nodded. Executioner cut off the power at the 20-minute mark. Way longer than it's supposed to take. Paul took a deep breath. By that point, Caraway looked like a half-spent candle. Bastard wasn't just alive, he was coherent, begging for death. How is that possible, I asked. I knew exactly how. The question was, did the warden? Problem with the chair, maybe. The warden shrugged. I made the call to override his wishes. He got the lethal injection and stopped breathing at 3:45. Caraway was dead. I relaxed a little in my chair, but tried not to show a change in my posture. Why did you get into this job, Kathy? Paul asked. The shift in questioning caught me off guard. Where was he going with this? Honestly? I asked. I hate when you say that, he said. Implies you've been dishonest about everything else. I picked a terrible time to be a chef. Restaurants going under right and left. What was it, 25% in the whole country that year? Something like that, Paul agreed. Any halfway decent owner wanted a chef with serious culinary experience. Sleazy ones wanted to get me on server staff so they could see my ass in one of those tiny uniform skirts, I said. You were my only option. Cooking last meals for death row inmates has its perks, Paul said. No bad reviews to worry about. No repeat customers either. The ideal learning environment. He curled his lips into a smile. But that was years ago. You've got your degree now. More than enough talent and experience. Anyone would have hired you. The challenge, I said. I mean, you're cooking someone's last meal. You only get one of those. Unless you're Norton Caraway. No other reason? The warden asked. I answered honestly. Number. He leaned in. You didn't ever like to mess with them? Who? The prisoners. You ever mess with their food? He knew, and he saw it in my eyes. What's going on? Engineer took a look at the chair. Paul bit his lip and shook his head. Nothing wrong with it. So after Caraway's heart stopped, I ordered an autopsy. Maybe he had some freak medical condition. I don't know what I was expecting. The warden went on, his voice starting to shake with anger. You know what I find? What? DNA. A victim's DNA. Daniela's blood, mixed in with the food in Caraway's stomach and intestines. My face felt prickly. Stress sweat tricked down my forehead, stinging my eyes. Her what? I'm asking you this as a courtesy, because I consider you a friend. Did you tamper with Caraway's last meal? I opened my mouth. And before you answer, he cut me off. Keep in mind what's going to happen here. Sure, the state wants to keep this one low profile, but they'll still need to at least investigate what went wrong. Might do their own autopsy. Maybe take a look at your other meals. I need to know how long this has been going on. Was this always some karmic justice for you? Like spitting in a rude customer's food on a just sick level? Paul, you don't understand. I'm sorry, Kathy, I've got to fire you. You can walk away clean. If you don't make a fuss, I don't think they will either. Food tampering? Then it clicked. Paul only thought I'd been tampering with their food. He harbored no suspicions anything supernatural even happened. He didn't know what I'd done. The ritual that evil woman had convinced me to play a part in. I thought back to Rebecca and the vial she had given me, along with a tattered recipe card. Execution is too good for him, she'd said. Feed Caraway this and he will never know peace. Where had she gotten her daughter's blood for the concoction? Why did the lethal injection work when the electric chair failed? A blaring siren from some distant watchtower answered my second question. Prisoner escape. the warden muttered under his breath. He reached for his phone. Before it was halfway from its cradle to his ear, a corrections officer barged into the room, panting. "What's happened? Are you all right?" Paul gestured to the front of his uniform, soaked in blood. "It's not mine." "Then whose? Who's down?" "The coroner." The warden had gotten halfway to his feet when he froze, his brow wrinkled. "Wait, then who's missing?" "Caraway." My breath caught in my throat. "Caraway's body is gone. Autopsy report too. Someone must have broken in and dragged it off. They can't have gotten far." "How many hurt?" "Half dozen," the officer panted. "Pretty badly too. I don't know about Hopkins and Clark. Medics are with them, but..." The officer trailed off. "How about you? You're not wounded?" Paul asked. "No, sir." "Good. You'll need to keep Kathy safe in my office until those freaks are caught. You'd have to be some special kind of screwed up to try stealing a famous killer's body." "Yeah," I agreed. He jabbed one of his sausage fingers in my direction. "Don't think I'm done with you. This isn't over." He had no idea how right he was. The corrections officers didn't catch them. Little did they know, there wasn't a them to catch. A member of the riot team made raving claims, said he'd fired dozens of rounds into the charred, disemboweled corpse of Norton Caraway. He just kept coming, howling in pain the whole time. The warden's preferred explanation felt equally far-fetched to me. The unnameable agency that had honed Caraway into a ruthless instrument of death wanted his body for some clandestine purpose, so they took it. Staff buried an empty box in the prison cemetery and pretended the night had never happened. Theories of witchcraft, or an undead man fighting his way out of the penitentiary, never crossed anyone's mind. If everyone was willing to forget, perhaps I could too. But I couldn't. He had the warden's autopsy report, the one that raised questions about his last meal, and the woman who cooked it. I kept thinking of the way he studied me, how normal he'd looked. He was average height and in decent shape. Neat, combed hair, atop a round face, with a small nose. Nothing about him was intimidating, or even remarkable. Difficult to pick out of a lineup. Paul quietly let me go from my job at the prison. Felt like I got off easy for what I did. I decided to put my talents to other uses. I'm working on setting up a non-profit that helps provide hot meals to victims' families. Setting it all up involved a lot of phone calls to try and secure money. That meant a lot of unknown numbers popping up on my caller ID. So when my cell rang one weekday evening, I answered without hesitation. "Hello, Kathy speaking." "Kathy, I've just learned the most interesting recipe. You should cook it for that charity of yours." The voice was wheezy and labored. "It's to die for." The caller let out a laugh somewhere between cackle and coughing fit. "Who is this?" I demanded, but I knew. "Rebecca told me everything I needed to know, in the end. Told me how to reverse what you bitches did to me," Caraway said. "The bullets weren't the worst of it. Frying in that chair, being paralyzed while they cut me open to dig around in my guts," he raved. "I felt everything. I still feel everything. The pain is constant." I kept the phone close to my ear, turning on the spot to ensure my windows and doors were secured. I kept expecting the man's marred remains to leap out at me. "But you can take that pain away," Caraway rasped. "I'd be honored, Kathy, if you'd have me over for dinner." My phone buzzed with a text message notification. A new image, bony fingers wrapped in disfigured skin, pinched the edges of a recipe card. "Dinner for two," I read aloud. The witch could only push around pain and suffering from one person to the next. "Daniela to me, and now me to you," Caraway said. "Follow those instructions, and you'll have a proper last meal for me." "And for me?" I asked. Caraway laughed. "You'll take on my suffering, every pinprick of pain I've felt since I ate that cursed dinner you served me. It's a heavy burden, I admit." "If I refuse?" "I'd hoped your conscience might get the better of you, or at least some sense of responsibility for what you unleashed." He sighed, his labored breath crackling in the receiver. "Rebecca said we both needed to eat willingly. I can't force you to cook or eat, but I can certainly persuade you." "How?" "Use your imagination. Watch. Give me a ring when you've seen enough." The call ended. I called the police, lied about some vague phone threats from a stalker. An officer came to search the house. When he found nothing, he promised he would be in the area and gave me his number. I was so worried about my physical safety that I never quite wrapped my head around what the madman actually threatened me with. He's careful, but I can see his pattern in the disappearances and killings that go unsolved. I've unleashed a quiet terror on the world, a man who craves death, who cannot be killed, and whom no one is looking for. And he wants to make me pay. I know what I have to do to stop him. I know I'm the only one who can, but I'm scared of what it means to take on that pain myself. Every time I think I'm strong enough, I think back to those screams of agony from the witness gallery and the smell of burning flesh. Maybe justice can wait a little longer? The silent call. I'm David, and I have been a call handler for Cambridgeshire Police for 5 years, mostly working on emergency 999 calls. In that time, I must have taken hundreds of silent nines calls. A silent call isn't always silent. It's just how we refer to a call where the caller isn't responsive and no request for the police has been made. They are mostly people accidentally pocket dialing, but you always have to go through the routine of trying to get a response, checking the phone number against previous calls to see if there is any history to suggest someone may be in danger, listening for any background noise to suggest any distress or disturbance. If there is a reason for concern, we will dispatch someone to check. Usually there isn't any concern and the incident log is closed off without any further action. This call wasn't that unusual. An operator transfers the call though and states the basic facts. No request made for police. Possible breathing was heard down the line, but that wasn't very clear due to the background noise, which was, quite irritatingly, the theme tune to Peppa Pig. So many silent calls are from children playing with phones while sitting in front of the television. So again, this wasn't too unusual. The line was still open, so I tried to engage with the caller. You're through to the police, is anyone there? No response. If you can hear me, can you press a button on the keypad or make a noise? Still no response. I did some system checks. There was a history of calls from this number from 7 years ago, but these were all marked restricted, so I couldn't see any details. After a while, satisfied there was no apparent emergency, I stopped trying and announced that I would be ending the call. Just as I pressed the button on my phone to hang up, I heard a voice. Hello, it said just as I cut it off. I instantly called back. The line answered, but again there was no response. Peppa Pig still played in the background, but not a full episode, just the theme tune on repeat. Once again, it got to the point of ending the call, and just as I pressed the button to hang up, hell, for fuck's sake. Before calling back again, I slid off my headset and walked over to the supervisor, advising him I had a silent call with restricted history to see if he could check the details for any reason for ongoing concern. I sat back at my desk ready to call back, and the supervisor came over to me, quicker than I expected. Don't worry about that history, he said nonchalantly. They're old incidents and it won't be the same caller. Might not even be the right number, could just be a glitch on the line. If there's nothing new on the call, get rid of it. I know it sounds harsh, but it wasn't unusual for us to be that blunt about a 999 call. We deal with so many. If there is no sign of distress or disturbance, we can't waste any more time on it. A real emergency call could be waiting. It wasn't unusual for call logs to be restricted either, usually because they contained information on other staff members or their families. Sometimes because the incident related to some ongoing operation, only high-ranking officers should see. I decided to give the line one last call back. It rang and picked up as before. The Peppa Pig theme played on a loop. Hello? She sounded weak and confused. Can you hear me? I've been trying for so long to get through. Why won't anyone help me? Why have you called us? What is the problem? I asked. She went silent for a while, then, nobody will help me. I keep calling. Can you help me? What is your name? I asked. Nicole. She paused. I think. Please help me. David, help me. Then the line went dead. I hadn't told her my name. Maybe someone else called David was there. I called her back. Stop calling me. Just come and help me, please. My daughter is here. We need help. Where are you? I asked, trying to get the key information to send someone out. 37 Butterfield Road. She sounded panicked, breathing heavily. Please help. While she was talking, I was already updating my incident, entering the address and sending it for dispatch. I'm going to get someone right out to you. What's happening? The line cleared. I transferred the incident to the dispatchers on an immediate grade, the highest priority grade for attendance. I didn't understand what was going on, but someone was in distress, with presumably a young child present. We needed to attend. While I was updating the notes on the incident log, the system kicked me out. The incident became restricted, and the details on the incident list replaced with restricted. It wasn't unusual for this to happen, so only the dispatcher and the control room inspector, known as Oscar 1, could see the incident, while still sending someone out to the address. I couldn't understand why this was restricted, but that is above my pay grade. Nicole kept calling throughout my shift. She was getting increasingly agitated and afraid. I assured her someone was coming out, but after an hour, I started to doubt this was the case. I spoke to my supervisor. They said they would ask Oscar 1. Oscar 1 said this was even above them. They have been told not to attend. It was being dealt with by another department as part of an existing operation. My shift came to an end at 2 a.m. Before then, Nicole had called a few more times. I kept telling her someone was dealing with it, but I don't think she believed me. She started to get angrier with me. She kept shouting her address at me, 37 Butterfield Road, desperate for someone to come and help her. She was screaming my name at me, the name I had never told her. I noticed on my mapping system that I knew the road. It was near my route home. I was glad to take off my headset when 2 a.m. came. I got in my car and drove home. Guided by compulsion, I drove down Butterfield Road. I wondered if someone may be there to help by now. I looked out for number 37, but I couldn't find it. It was a normal residential road, but in the middle, there was a gap between houses 35 and 39, which was filled with small trees, well-maintained bushes, and a flower bed. I drove up and down the road a couple of times to check I had the right place, then stopped at a 24-hour off license further down the road. I went into the shop to buy a can of Coke for an excuse to ask the lady at the till where number 37 was. She seemed unimpressed, rolling her eyes at me. "Nicole's house?" she asked. "You're a few years too late to see it. They knocked it down to stop all you true crime nuts coming to gawp at it." Once I had paid, she shoved my drink back across the counter at me. "It's been almost a decade now. You'd think people would let that poor family rest." I left. Clearly the lady wasn't going to entertain any more questions from me. I got in the car and immediately went on my phone to search the internet for references to what happened at Nicole's house. I found an old local news story headline from 7 years ago referencing the murder of her and her children, and another more recent article suggesting the murder remained unsolved. But my search was interrupted by a phone call from an unknown number. I had to answer. "David," Nicole shouted. "David, where are they? You promised me help was coming." I didn't know what to say, largely because I didn't know what was happening. What was I really talking to? I can't help you." The line cleared. Then straight away, another call, Nicole screaming. A child cried out in fear in the background. The line cleared again. The phone rang. I didn't answer. It rang again, and again, and again. I couldn't answer again. Would these calls continue? I couldn't take it. I got out of the car and walked to the memorial garden where 37 Butterfield Road once stood. The flower bed occasionally glittered with gold in the streetlight. I went over and knelt down for a closer look, and the ground littered with other SIM cards. Even whole phones had been discarded there. Some were old and partially submerged in the dirt, but others were fresh. Some were clean enough they could have been scattered here within days. I looked at my phone and considered adding my SIM card to the garden. "You too?" a man said from behind me with a drunken slur. The surprise made my heart stop. I turned to see a haggard man looking at the memorial garden. He stunk of vodka and smiled at me sadly. "It won't stop her. It never does." He was right. Nicole still calls me, on any phone, at any time. No amount of call-blocking efforts can stop her. Sometimes I accidentally answer. She still screams for help, facing a danger that has long since passed. I was pulled aside at the start of my first shift back at work to talk about the calls with an officer who had come up from London. I assumed she was from the home office. She was very official and very guarded. I told her I had got calls on my personal phone, and she didn't seem surprised. She told me it was officially a hoax caller, but we both knew that wasn't true. I was instructed to keep a log of the calls and email them to her weekly. I have been off work for 2 weeks now. The woman who visited told me to take as much time off as I needed, on full pay. Her department would authorize it as long as I kept them updated. After all, I wouldn't be much use going to work just to talk to a woman who doesn't know she is dead. Story. There's a dark truth connecting 3 1980s upstate New York murder cases. This comes from someone who claims to be a former forensic investigator that worked for a few precincts in upstate New York. To clarify, I have no personal ties to this person, don't know why they specifically reached out to me, or felt this page was their only remaining option to tell their story. I'm simply passing along what they said and will leave it to your own interpretation. After conducting my own research, however, I will say their theories are plausible, and whoever this is genuinely believes they've uncovered something heinous. Here's the account I received, told in their point of view. I worked as a forensic investigator in New York State's Delaware and Columbia counties. I've seen my fair share of crime scenes, from child suicides at ages they had no business of even entertaining such thoughts, to gruesome accidents and murder victims killed in the worst ways imaginable. There were 3 particular cases whose backstories compelled me to dig deeper, even after the official investigations concluded. What I found made me question the extents of reality, human depravity, and avarice. The first happened in East Chatham, December 1986. A teen, who I'll refer to as Will, murdered 4 of his family members, seeming to be driven by financial gain. All 4 bodies were discovered in their bedrooms, dying from gunshot wounds to the head. Despite being described as a shallow, detached individual, Will excelled in school and was thought to have a bright future. His family was very active in the community and owned a successful business, which made these murders especially stunning. The teen readily confessed when questioned, but wasn't very forthcoming on certain crime scene details: dozens of candles placed on top of coins scattered around the house, inscriptions written in blood on the living room floor, most of which we couldn't document because they were repeatedly tracked over before we arrived, and the bodies all being smeared with an oily light green substance. The coroner reports on all 4 bodies described their wounds as narrow, bullet-shaped holes entering through the victim's forehead and exiting through the back. The exit wounds looked nothing like those made by bullets, no casings or rounds were found, and tests for gunpowder residue were incidentally damaged at the lab by a pipe burst. While the official report said all 4 victims died from gunshots, it was technically never proven. Thinking they had sufficient evidence, detectives saw no need to investigate further after Will confessed and overlooked these bizarre details. Although they determined Will, who claimed to have no recollection of that night, suffered a psychotic breakdown, I always suspected he had an ulterior motive. Any attempts at deciphering what was written on the living room floor were futile, except for one semi-legible phrase, Judoc. The light green slippery substance slathered on all 4 bodies was also identified as money oil, an herbal remedy used in witchcraft that supposedly brings prosperous wealth. Although many acknowledged there was a lot more going on, everyone ultimately wanted to move forward and minimize the attention East Chatham was receiving from this tragedy. In the end, I understood the desire to put this dark chapter of East Chatham's history behind us, and eventually accepted I wouldn't learn any more about what happened than what was already known. Fast forward a few years later, when I was working in Delaware County. The second case happened in June 1989, another mass murder that conjured up memories of East Chatham. A 23-year-old, I'll call Evan, murdered his family at their cabin outside Stamford. Lit candles placed on top of coins littered the home, where 4 bodies were found in the house's attic. Initially perceived as gunshots, the autopsy report explained their wounds as being bullet-shaped entrances that went completely through the victim's body. Unlike the East Chatham killings, these murder victims contained several deep perforations. The bodies were centered around a strange symbol that seemed to depict a blocky, crookedly drawn uppercase B, A small backwards J protruded from the B's lower left corner, while a jagged uppercase T branched off its top left end. The emblem was drawn with a scorched powder that, based on samples recovered, had an initial light green color and was composed of different herbs. It looked like Evan had been interrupted in the middle of whatever he was doing, prompting him to flee. He was cornered at an abandoned farm in a neighboring county, which ensued a lengthy standoff. Before being gunned down after opening fire on police, officers on scene recalled Evan kept screaming he was so close, needed to complete the circle, and finish the process. One bizarre piece of evidence was a black envelope Evan pinned on his family's business storefront sometime after committing the murders. It was covered in green wax and contained burnt remnants of paper that, from what few strands were salvaged, appeared to be some kind of letter or note. Although Evan apparently had severe mental issues, this dismissive explanation for his appalling actions disregarded some alarming details. Evan was apparently obsessed with money and wealth, to the point where it influenced him at a cognitive level. He stood to assume his entire family's estate, which, according to friends of his, Evan incessantly pondered about the liquid value of and what he'd do with all that cash. When I disputed the investigation's conclusions, my police chief gave a familiar explanation. "Evan's dead," he said. "No need to allocate time and resources to an already solved case." Even after noting every similarity with the East Chatham murders, he wouldn't entertain any further inquiries, and eventually reassigned me to another division. It was after this I learned the powdery substance found in the attic was identified as money powder, which had many similar vegetal ingredients as its oleaginous counterpart, money oil. Despite violating orders and an abundance of department codes, I started my own secret investigation trying to connect these cases. There was too much overlap between them that I couldn't let this go without leaving no stone unturned. Both killings were committed by young men with financial motives. They murdered their families in near-identical manners. Candles placed on top of coins and substances made from the same materials were found at both crime scenes. Although I was convinced Will and Evan were trying to perform the same or closely related rituals, my evidence was circumstantial at best. I needed a direct link connecting them that would give my theory the credence necessary to be taken seriously. About a year into my independent probe, a case from February 1988 in Groveland, New York, was brought to my attention. A man I'll call Larry murdered his whole family before committing suicide and setting their house on fire. After extinguishing the blaze, police discovered 5 bodies. Larry killed his wife and 3 children, who were each found lying in their beds. Although gunshots were officially deemed all 5 victims' causes of death, Larry was the only one described as being explicitly caused by a firearm. His wife and kids died from what the documents described as wounds closely resembling a gunshot that completely passed through the victim's cranial region. For me, there were 2 affirming details in this case that connected to the East Chatham and Stamford killings. Investigators determined the fire was started by lighting a charred black envelope. The note inside was too badly burned and no longer legible, but this envelope looked exactly like the one Evan pinned on his family's storefront. Larry also had a tattoo on his back matching the symbol found at the Stamford Sinea jagged B with a smaller uppercase T and backwards J stemming from its corners. I also discovered Larry and his wife were having marital problems, which derived from a crippling financial situation that put them on the precipice of ruin. Finding this case led to more chilling discoveries. One regarded an owl rope bracelet with a gold wolf head charm Larry had on his wrist. Will wore the exact same bracelet when he was found, which I neglected to mention earlier. Despite living in Groveland when murdering his family, Larry settled there fairly recently, having lived most of his life in Schoharie County. Not only did he own a business in East Chatham from 1983-1985, where Will happened to work for 8 months, but the abandoned farmhouse where Evan made his final stand was on land formerly owned by Larry's family. I delved further into Larry's background. Although information was hard to come by, it led me to learning about lupus viridis, meaning green wolf in Latin. What little I found described them as some kind of fraternal order, where Larry was a member. The only other details I uncovered about lupus viridis was they were formerly headquartered in a now-abandoned lodge located somewhere between Medusa and Southwesterloreley, the midway point between East Chatham and Stamford. The lodge burned down in the summer of 1989, after which the organization appeared to cease operations. The former lodge's dilapidated remains still stand today. I spent months trying to uncover more about Lupus Vertus, but had stagnant progress and came to a barrage of dead ends. Shortly after, however, my rogue investigation was halted after being discovered by the DA's office. Although no charges were pressed, the police confiscated most of my documents and case files, after which I was swiftly terminated. A few years passed, when something seemingly out of the blue happened that dragged me back down this rabbit hole. I woke up one morning to find hundreds of papers, which came from a filing cabinet filled with old files I still had on these cases that the police somehow missed, littering the room where they were kept. Written on every one of those papers was a 6-letter word: Mammon. It was written in what appeared to be bloodhand. I initially neglected to mention the filing cabinet holding these old documents was in my bedroom. I couldn't let anyone know these files were still in my possession, so I took to the internet, where I gained a lot of perturbing insight on this word's meaning. Mammon was a theological demonic entity representing greed and want, who promised its worshippers boundless wealth. I almost fell over after first seeing Mammon's sigil, a distorted B with an uppercase T and backwards J jutting from its upper and lower left corners. It was the same symbol found in Will's attic and tattooed on Larry's back. This led me to read up on the different rituals for summoning Mammon. They varied in complexity, and many involved using specific items like candles, coins, owl rope, herbal remedies like money, oil, and powder, along with writing letters and requests to Mammon that you burn or place in black envelopes. I was especially bothered by a redundant detail of Mammon's appearance that was in quite a few visual depictions of the being. Many had Mammon brandishing a long, narrow spike that retracted from its wrist, which was used to impale its victims' bodies. The stories I read said Mammon extract people's souls in this grisly manner, which were added to a collection it amassed over the millennia. It made me think about the wounds every one of those cases' murder victims had, which every report was quick to write off as gunshots. What else could create that type of opening? Were those poor souls truly at rest, or suffering a far worse fate? Mammon also apparently frequented the form of a wolf, which made sense of the fraternal order being named Lupus Vertus, and those owl rope bracelets worn by Will and Larry having wolf head charms. I also don't think the dates all 3 massacres occurred were randomly chosen. Will killed his family on the 13th of December, when the Feast of St. Judoc is held. Judoc, the word we found written at the East Chatham crime scene, was a young, wealthy prince who gave up his opulence to become a priest. He lived a life of modesty, solitude, and was said to be a staunch adversary of Mammon, since he stood against everything the demon represented. Apparently, using blood to write names of you or your deity's antagonists is a form of mockery and scorn in occultism that supposedly appeases and empowers your idol. The Stamford murders happened on the 22nd of June, which falls on the summer solstice, whose signified period of growth is considered an opportune time to summon certain beings, and when the season of Mammon begins. Larry's murder-suicide occurred on the 28th of February, 1988, which fell on a leap year. In the dark arts, leap years are supposed to provide a window for spirits and other beings to enter our world. It's worth mentioning many works I read about or mentioned Mammon described him coming in and out of our world using these leap year portals. Having presented my facts, I'll now tell you what I believe happened. Lupus Vertus was secretly a cult dedicated to Mammon, whose members sought wealth and prosperity. Some rituals for summoning this being say flesh and blood offerings yielded greater rewards, based on enormity, if done correctly and precisely. I suppose the magnitude of sacrificing one's family was thought to yield endless rewards from this being. Larry recruited Will and Evan, who became indoctrinated by the Order's teachings. My guess is Will failed to properly complete his ritual, causing him to undergo an irreversible mental breakdown. Evan appeared to have gotten interrupted while performing his, likely by police when they arrived at the house. Larry's situation was less clear. He was overcome with grief, either for botching or coming to grips on what he was actually doing during his ritual, and ended his life in response. After how much publicity the Stamford killings got, Lupus Vertus probably decided to vacate the area or go underground, which could explain why their lodge burned. I expectedly made waves when trying to get my findings reviewed and investigate whether Lupus Vertus was still operating. I should have seen it coming, but anyone who even gave me the time of day dismissed my report, saying the evidence was too disputable, circumstantial, and, most insulting of all, inventive. I eventually gave up when my former precincts threatened me with legal action for not turning over all the files and documents I still had, who said I was rehashing settled business that had no need to be revisited. Things settled down for a while afterwards, until something that happened recently. I found a familiar-looking black envelope among some of my spouse's belongings, while clearing out a room that we were renovating. After reading the recently dated letter it contained, I now know I'm not safe in my home and have been closely watched by people I've known and loved for years on behalf of a certain aforementioned organization. I don't know who to trust or where I'll go, but hope making my story known will help anyone that is, or suspects they're in a similar situation. This goes way deeper than expected, and those cases I used to put this puzzle together may only be the beginning of uncovering what other horrors this entity and its devout followers have committed. Story: I'm an FBI agent. This case will haunt me. The woman who answered the door when I knocked had tears in her eyes. She clutched her housecoat tighter around herself and took me in, looking me up and down. "Mrs. Burton? I'm Agent Barnes. May I come in, please?" She regarded me through the glass, staring coldly at my face. "They said you'd be coming. You're from the FBI. Some sort of special unit?" "That's right, ma'am," I said, pulling out my ID badge and showing it to her. After examining it for a while, she turned the handle, pausing to take a quick, hopeful look around the neighborhood, before finally holding the creaking screen door open for me. I stepped up the wooden staircase and entered the house. The home was well kept. Old but comfortable furnishings, walls covered in framed photos showing barbecues and family gatherings, weddings and birthday parties. It looked like a peaceful place. Not an abusive household or a neglected one, I thought to myself. I took out my notepad and scribbled something illegible. "I'm here to follow up on the case involving your son, Brian. Do you mind if we sit down to talk for a few minutes?" She showed me into the living room, and I took a seat on the couch. "Can I get you anything, Agent Barnes?" "And no, I'm fine. Thank you, though." Instead of sitting down opposite me, she chose to remain standing, making me feel oddly nervous. I tried to ignore that sensation, but it did throw me off slightly. Most people sit down when you do, especially when they're the host. "What can I do for you exactly?" "Well, I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your son's disappearance. I understand he went missing from his bedroom late one night, and there was no sign of forced entry. The doors were still locked in the morning when you woke up, is that right?" She nodded slowly. "And all this despite the fact that he didn't have a key, and none were missing from the home." She stood with her arms crossed, not saying anything. "Was there a question in there somewhere, Agent Barnes?" I waited for a beat. This wasn't how I had expected it to go. Already I felt like my entire preconception of the case was wrong. My theories were immediately forgotten, and I began to examine the whole situation with fresh eyes as I sat there looking into the woman's unreadable face. I suppose my question is, how did he go missing? It seems impossible, unless there's something you aren't telling us. A door left open, or a window, a neighbor with a copy of your key, something. You have to try to remember. You're singing the same old song that the detective was singing. Nobody else had a key. None of the windows or doors were unlocked. I'm sure about that. And you're sure he didn't sneak out after dinner to play with friends? No one would blame you if that were the case. Kids that age like to go out in the forests, run around, get into trouble. Are you sure he was in his room that night when you went to bed? I'm sure. I tucked him in myself. I'm not a drunk or a druggie, Agent Barnes. I'm not a neglectful mother either. I didn't forget seeing my son in bed that night. Just like I didn't forget to lock up. This was going nowhere, I could already tell. We were off to a bad start, and I had a feeling she could sense my newfound hesitancy and uncertainty. I put my notepad away and thought for a few seconds what direction to take. I had to improvise. "Can you show me his room? I'd like to see it if I could." Her face showed no change of expression at the request, She just held her hand out, inviting me towards the back of the house. I followed her as she led me down a hallway with creaking wooden floorboards. "Do you have children, Agent Barnes?" "Yes, a son." "How old is he, if you don't mind me asking?" 11, actually. Same as your Brian." "Good. Now imagine for a second what it would feel like to have him taken from you in the night, despite doing everything possible to stop something like that from ever happening. I hate to think of it. That's every parent's worst nightmare." "Here's his bedroom," she said, opening a door at the end of the hall on the left. "It's just as he left it. I didn't change a thing." The room was painted a pale blue shade, and there was a small bed in one corner, a desk with a computer sitting atop it, a gaming console, and a small television on the far end with a beanbag chair in front of it. There were no signs of violence or disarray. Nothing looked out of place or broken. A few items of clothing and toys were scattered here and there, but overall it looked cleaner than my own son's room. Was anything missing? Any of his belongings? Clothes? Toothbrush? Phone? Brian doesn't have a phone. He kept begging me for one, but I told him he wasn't old enough. She broke off suddenly, her face screwing up into a grimace of sorrow. If I'd just let him have a damn cell phone, maybe they could have traced it. I put a comforting hand on her shoulder, and she let me do that at least, without pulling away. "Even if you had, he wouldn't have had it on him while he was sleeping. You can't blame yourself for that," I told her, feeling suddenly more and more on her side. "And just so you know, my son doesn't have a cell phone either." I told him the same thing. The woman bit her lip, hugging herself tighter. She turned her eyes up to the ceiling, trying to dry the tears within them, as if she couldn't bear the thought of weeping 1 minute longer. "Do you think Brian could have made a copy of your key? Maybe without your knowledge? That just maybe he could have snuck out in the night and locked up afterwards?" She shook her head rapidly. "He's 11. And no, I told the officers, he isn't like that. He's a good boy." I looked over to see the closet in the corner of the room was now hanging open ever so slightly, but I distinctly remembered it being closed when I came into the room. Inside it looked pitch black. For some reason I was drawn towards that darkness and began to walk across the room towards the closet door. What I was looking for within that darkness I wasn't sure, but it seemed important that I check inside. Brian told me something the night before he disappeared. He said there was a monster in his closet. I stopped dead in my tracks. Most children of 11 years old have grown out of seeing monsters in the shadows, haven't they? At least my son had. He had grown out of that phase for a long time, she said, as if reading my thoughts. But then all of a sudden that night he told me there was this monster hiding in his closet, and he what? He actually wet the bed. He hadn't done that for a long time. I see. And so he came out here and told you all that, and then what happened? I went back to his room with him right away, and I turned the light on and opened his closet to show him there was nothing inside. Just his clothes and a few old shoes, but he still wasn't convinced. He said the monster was a very good hider, that it pretended to be shadows. Glancing back at the open closet door again, I started moving towards it once more, this time with my legs feeling more wobbly, like jello. He washed up, and I changed his sheets, and he went back to bed. Brian wanted to stay up with me and watch television after that. He didn't want to go back to his room, but I made him go. What time was this around? 2 o'clock in the morning. Around then. He had to get up for school the next day, she said, then broke off sobbing once again. Opening the closet door, I peered inside. The darkness permeated the whole space, like a thick, oily cloud of smoke, far more black and terrifying than it should have been. As if that darkness were a living thing, camouflaging itself there, pretending to be just a closet, just like the missing boy had claimed. I shook my head, trying to clear these thoughts from my mind, but they persisted. Can you turn the light on any brighter than that? No, it's all the way up. This stupid light bulb seems to get dimmer every day. Even after I replaced it, I'll have to get an electrician over here one of these days. Pulling out my flashlight, I shone it into the dark space. The oily blackness retreated almost reluctantly, as if in a delayed reaction that shouldn't have been possible. I blinked my eyes twice, trying to decide if I was seeing things. My heart was suddenly hammering, and the palms of my hands were sweaty as I stared at the darkened space in the dim beam of my flashlight. It seemed to be malfunctioning, weak compared to its usual strength. I smacked it a few times and tried to remember when I'd last replaced the batteries. "Can you feel it too?" she asked from behind me nervously. I wanted to turn around and look at her, but was afraid to leave my back exposed to that darkness. I know it's crazy, but ever since that night, I can't help but feel like maybe he was right. "Can you feel it? Something staring at you?" She let out a nervous titter, which broke me out of my stunned silence. "No, ma'am," I lied. "Just looks like a regular bedroom closet to me." "You feel like there's something in there looking at you?" "Not just me. At us. It's watching both of us right now, and it's seen your face, Agent Barnes. I don't think that's a good thing." "What? How come you don't want to turn your back on it, Agent Barnes? You do feel it. I know you do. Close the door so it can't stare at us anymore, will you?" "I don't like that feeling. Not one bit." I pushed it with a shaking hand and felt the satisfying click of it closing. Suddenly I could breathe again. We both left the room in a hurry, and I excused myself momentarily into the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize my own face staring back. There were bags beneath my eyes that hadn't been there before, and my skin looked slightly yellow-gray, sallow and jaundiced. I felt sick to my stomach. Before I could do anything, the nausea overcame me. Getting down on my knees, I retched into the toilet bowl. Pure black bile like molasses poured out of me, sticky and tenacious like tar. It burned like acid as it came up from my stomach, coating my tongue afterwards and tasting oily and terrible. I rinsed out my mouth and flushed the toilet again and again to no avail. I stumbled out of the bathroom, drunk feeling and dizzy, but still wanting to finish my interview. I needed to at least try. She was waiting for me in the kitchen, standing by the sink. I stumbled into the room and felt it spinning all around me. Clutching my head with both hands, I tried to force myself to see straight. "Just a couple more questions," I said, covering my mouth so she didn't see the black bile coating my tongue. My heart was pounding far too quickly, and I tried to ignore the fact that something was potentially very seriously wrong with me, still completely in denial of it at that point. "You don't look well, Agent Barnes. You look gray in the face. Are you all right?" "Fine. I'm fine. Now, can you tell me about Brian's father? I understand he passed away several years ago. Did he have any family? Close friends?" She shook her head at me, as if none of these questions mattered. And she was right, in a way. They didn't. The interview didn't lead anywhere, and I couldn't focus on anything she said. Soon I was back out on the street again, the memory of the end of the interview gone entirely from my mind. It was like I'd been on autopilot without realizing it, and I didn't like that feeling, as if someone else had been driving the car and I had been asleep behind the wheel. I had a very strong suspicion that whatever had happened to Brian would not be a solvable crime, and if it was solved, those findings would not be suitable for an official report. This had redacted written all over it, assuming it ever made it up the chain of command. If I told my superiors what I had just experienced, they wouldn't believe a word of it. The case had gone cold months before, so it wasn't expected for me to solve it, only to try to lend a hand if I could. Most of my cases ended up remaining unsolved, so it wouldn't require much explanation if I wasn't able to do anything useful. And I really didn't feel like I would be able to do anything useful. I had terrible brain fog for the rest of the trip, getting contemptuous looks from the local police detectives whenever I suggested anything I thought might be useful. Everything had been tried before, by the sounds of it, and I began to feel as if I had overstayed my welcome. The flight back home was a red-eye, and I tried to sleep through it, but found my dreams were plagued by nightmares. I kept dreaming I was a kid again, back in my childhood bedroom. Not only that, but my closet door kept squealing open in the night, creaking loudly, the wood swinging back and forth as if blown by an impossible wind. I stood up on my child legs to go over to it, but found myself frozen with fear, staring at the blackness within the closet. That deep, penetrating darkness which seemed to spread like flooding, overflowing water towards me. And then, as I reached out my trembling hand for the door handle to close it, something else reached out and grabbed my wrist. An ice-cold, gnarled hand, rotten and macerated. The flesh was pale and bluish-purple, mottled and covered in wounds, seeping and oozing with blood and pus. As I tried desperately to pull away, fighting it with all my strength, it pulled me deeper into the darkness. I fell in, plunging into the depths of it, suffocating in the dark abyss. When I woke up, I was screaming, and the airplane had just begun to descend. The flight attendants gave me a look which told me my terror was not appreciated. By the time I got home that night, it was already dark, and well past Greg's bedtime. My wife was in bed, so I poured myself a drink and sat down on the couch to watch television for a little while, hoping to distract myself from the things I had seen, and from the dreams I couldn't unsee. I wanted so badly to forget that dream, but it was the only thing I could visualize when I closed my eyes. That rotten corpse hand grabbing hold of my wrist and squeezing. I felt as if I could feel that pain even after I had awoken. That feeling of something tightening around my forearm like a freezing vice. I looked down at my arm to see a handprint there, slightly purple like an old bruise. It was faded like it was old, and yet I hadn't seen it earlier. What the hell? What's happening to me? I asked myself, standing up and pacing. There was cold beer in the fridge. Despite the time, I went in there and grabbed a bottle, popping it open and chugging its contents. I felt so thirsty all of a sudden, like I hadn't drank in days. But I didn't want water. The thought of it disgusted me. The bottle was empty, and so I grabbed another, and another, draining them both. Soon I was on my fourth, and then it was empty. The rest of the six-pack was gone 2 minutes later, and I belched loud enough to wake the dead after I had finished polishing it off. Still thirsty, I went into the cupboard and pulled out an old, dusty bottle of Gibson's, 1 I drank it straight down, the usual burn of it absent now. Instead, it just felt like heat in my belly afterwards. Suddenly very tired, I stumbled off to bed, but not before peeking into Greg's room to check on him. It was around 3 a.m. by that point. He was fast asleep and snoring, and his closet door was closed tightly. I made sure of that. When we woke up the next morning, Greg was gone. I had locked all the doors and windows, and Greg didn't have his own key. He didn't have a cell phone we could trace either, but I got the feeling it wouldn't make a difference either way. The police came to investigate and were surprised to hear what I do for a living. They were even more surprised to hear about the case I had just been investigating. Think it might be a copycat? One of the detectives asked innocently. If only it could have been so simple. Or maybe the same guy? You might be right, I said, unable to deny their logic. But I knew that wasn't what had happened. Not really. Let's take a look around his room, they said, and I led them down the hallway towards Greg's room, showing them inside. I left it exactly how it was. We didn't touch a thing. The closet door swung open an inch, then stopped. It opened an inch wider, and stopped again. Does the closet door always do that? The taller detective asked. Number, why don't you go and take a look? My wife stood at the front door with her suitcase in hand, her face and eyes red from hours of crying. You're not the man I married. I need to go. I just need to get out of this house for a while. Are you coming back? I don't know. She turned around to leave, and I reached out to stop her, grabbing her shoulder and squeezing a little harder than I meant to. I stopped myself and let go, asking myself again, what the hell is wrong with me? What exactly have I been infected with? Just tell me why. Haven't you been listening? Half the time you're not here, and the other half you're lost in your thoughts. You don't even hear the words I'm saying when I talk to you. Our son has been missing for days, and you act like nothing's happened, like there's nothing we can do. There isn't anything we can do. It's up to the local police. I have no jurisdiction. I told you that 100 times. And even if I did, it's a conflict of interest. I can't investigate my own son's disappearance, at least not officially. I'd believe that, I really would, if not for the smell of booze on your breath every day. You aren't even trying to help unofficially. It's like you've given up. All you do is drink, and when you're not drinking, you're missing for hours at a time. I'm going out looking for him. Just stay, please. She rolled her eyes, not believing my lie. When you get your shit together, you call me. Until then, I'll be staying with my sister. Goodbye, Ted. She opened the glass door and let it slam shut behind her as she marched towards the curb. Her sister pulled up a moment later in her little blue economy car and stared daggers at me as she waited for Lisa to get in. They drove off, and just like that, I was alone. I stood at the door for a long time before turning around and surveying the empty house. It didn't feel empty, though, not since that last case. In my son's bedroom closet, a shadow thing had taken up residence, not to mention it was now living inside of me. I couldn't help but wonder if I was serving as an incubator for some malicious creature growing larger by the day. My sadness suddenly turned to anger as I thought about it. Whatever the thing was, it had taken not just my child, but at least one other, maybe more. Not only that, but it was working on taking my life as well, erasing it in bits and pieces. I would lose chunks of time an hour long or more, and the periods of mental absence were growing longer and more frequent by the day. I marched towards my son's room and threw open the door. Turning on the light, it did little to illuminate the small space. It was as if the light bulbs needed to be replaced in the ceiling fan, but I had done that several times already. Just as the mother of the missing child on my investigation had said about her son's light, I too would need to call an electrician. Although I doubted that would help, I had to try. The darkness was already spreading out into the hallway, like a malicious plague made of shadows. "What do you want from me?" I asked the empty room, my eyes fixed on the closet door. I had put a deadbolt on it to keep it closed, but it began to slide across to the other side, as if being pulled by sideways gravity, or by an invisible hand. I rushed across the room to pull it closed, but it was too late. The lock was undone. The door began to swing open, revealing a crack of pure darkness, and I stopped in my tracks, not wanting to get any closer. My heart was pounding, and I had forgotten all about my anger. Now I was only afraid, like a child staring into the shadows of my bedroom closet late at night, hearing sounds from within it, rustling movement, papery like old snakeskin being shed, a poisonous midnight reptile growing larger by the day. "What did you do with my son?" I asked the empty closet. My voice was just above a whisper. I was backing up, now trying to get away. Whatever the thing was, it was getting stronger. "Daddy?" A voice sounding almost like my son said from within that darkness. I almost ran in that direction to save him, purely out of instinct. But then I stopped myself. Something about the voice was different, a slight distortion like it had been played through a guitar pedal. "No, it's not. It can't be." No response came back, only silence, and that feeling of something staring at me from the shadows. Not my son, but something else mimicking his voice. I stepped out of the room quickly and closed the door behind me. The hallway was noticeably darker now, as if that plague had spread insidiously further outwards into the rest of the house. There was no stopping it. I could only try to slow it down. I went into the dining room and grabbed a chair. Tipping it over onto its back legs, I jammed it against the doorknob, making an impromptu lock for the bedroom. I would need to get something stronger, though, and fast. A padlock, I decided. Maybe 2 or 3. First, I wanted to make a couple phone calls, while I was still the one steering my own body. Who knew when whatever entity was inside of me would take over and I would go into autopilot again? My first call was to my boss. I asked for a bit more time off to look for my son. He didn't question it for a second, and told me to call if I needed anything. After hanging up with him, I dialed another number. I hoped to contact the woman I had visited a few days prior in my capacity as an FBI agent while investigating her missing son. She had acted quite strangely, and had known about the shadow entity, whatever it was. It was also the place where this had all started. "Hello, Agent Barnes," she answered, knowing it would be me despite the fact that my FBI-issued cell phone blocked my caller ID. "Mrs. Burke, I called to ask you a few follow-up questions." She waited silently for me to continue. Several moments passed and I wondered if she'd hung up. "Mrs. Burke?" "Ask away, Agent Barnes. I'm curious though. How are you feeling? You didn't look well last time I saw you." "Fine. I'm fine. I'm sure you are. Mrs. Burke, can I ask you about your husband again? We skipped past that last time. You said you were married. Where was he when I came by? At work?" "My husband passed away very recently, Agent Barnes. He caught some sort of illness. The doctors couldn't figure it out. It consumed him from within, like a flesh-eating bacteria." Goosebumps suddenly broke out across the flesh of my arms, and I realized I was holding my breath and let it out. Is that what it was? Necrotizing fasciitis? No, not that. Like I said, they couldn't figure it out. They'd never seen anything like it before. All I remember is by the end they wanted him out of the hospital. They were trying to convince us to take him home to die. Whatever was wrong with him, it was scaring the nurses. The doctors too. But they wouldn't say that, of course. I found my voice was suddenly caught in my throat, and I was unable to speak. It's the same thing that's infected you, Agent Barnes. Don't ask me why it didn't take me. Maybe it doesn't like women for some reason. Maybe it is a bit like a serial killer. It takes only certain types of victims. Again, I couldn't speak. Stay out of the hospital. They won't be able to help you, and you'll only spread it further. Goodbye, Agent Barnes. Don't call here again. I can't help you. No one can. As the phone disconnected, so did I. That was the last thing I remembered. When I regained consciousness, I was back in my son's bedroom, the closet door hanging wide open in front of me. I stumbled out of the room and looked for a chair to put back beneath the door handle, but they were all gone, missing from the house completely. All the lights were off, and I went around trying to turn them back on, only to find the bulbs smashed and the light switches torn from the walls. My phone cast a dim glow, revealing that several hours had passed, but no GPS data had been recorded. That was when I noticed the red stains on my hands. In the dim light cast by my phone, I stood in the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror. I saw that my hands were covered in dried blood up to the elbows. It was splattered on my face and clothing, too. As far as I could tell, it was not my own. A voice called from my son's room again, this time sounding a little bit more like him. And then, to my horror, the sound of a child's footsteps came towards me, and he called out again, closer this time. Daddy? What happened? Why are you hiding? And where's Mommy? He started to laugh, sounding utterly inhuman once again, then appeared before me in the hallway outside the bathroom door. His eyes looked black as polished coal, and his smile was full of malice. I had a strong suspicion. Whatever this thing was, it was not my child.